welcome back to everyone who joined us last week for the first session of our Building Healthy and Sustainable Worshiping Communities and Congregations, a case study from Paris Community Church. I'm Karen Plater, Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving, and am leading this seminar with the Reverend Joel Sherbino, minister from Paris Community Church in Ontario. And we'll just give you a few little reminders that the recordings and slides will be available at presbyterian.ca/webinars. Feel free to share the recordings around if you think that this is really great and somebody wants to watch it in your congregation or want to watch it as a session. Please, feel free. This is a tool for you to use. And once it's up, Grace will send you an email to let you know what's available. Just some protocols. So a recap for those who've just been joining. You're gonna be muted throughout the session. And if you think of a question as we're going along, write it in your chat or Q&A, and Grace is going to monitor them and ask them at the end. And then you're going to also have the option to be unmuted and ask a question in person, just so we can have a bit of the dialogue. We'll start with land acknowledgement, and we know that we are gathering from congregations across Canada who worship and live and serve on the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples. The Presbyterian Church in Canada national offices are on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit Indigenous peoples. We are all on a journey of healing and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And the next one. Yes, and a reminder that this webinar is made possible by your congregations and your gifts to Presbyterian Sharing. One of the roles of Presbyterian Sharing is to equip congregations in Christian education, worship, evangelism, stewardship, communications, youth ministry, and justice work. And this webinar touches on many of those subjects, or at least the webinar series does by the time we're done. With that said, I am going to turn you over to Joel, who will continue to share with us the experience of leading ministry in the community of Paris for Paris Community Church. Take it over, Joel.
Great, thanks, Karen. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you back. It's a real honor to be able to share a little bit of our story, and the fact that you came back for week 2 is awesome. So. Just again, a quick overview. I really hope that our 4 weeks together kind of continue to come back to a similar theme. So talk about just kind of how we work together as a church. And again, if there's questions, and some of you follow up with me during the week, if you have questions or you have other things you want to follow up on, please send me an email. I'm happy to share everything and all the resources that we have. I'll talk a little bit about some of that later on, but don't hesitate to ask. If you want to check it out as well, jump on our website. You can see just kind of how we integrate some of the things that I am talking about as well. And so just a reminder, kind of last week, we talked a little bit about culture and kind of key lessons that we've been learning as a church in terms of how do we reach our community? How do we sustain just a healthy model of a church and a congregation? This week, I'm going to talk a little bit around stewardship, around how does it start to look like when we talk about use of our building and then also use of our finances. And I know finances can sometimes be a bit of a tricky conversation. And so I'm going to kind of open the book in terms of how I approach it as a pastor. And some of this may be new to you. Some of you may be like, I don't agree with this. And so my hope is not that we all necessarily agree, but that at least it allows us to start to think through why we do what we do and kind of move forward. Week 3 will then kind of get into more of the nuts and bolts around outreach and kind of how we reach our community. And then week 4, we'll talk about discipleship. How do we actually put together a plan so that everyone that comes into our doors, regardless of where they were in life or in faith, can take a next step in their relationship with Jesus. So that's kind of where we're going to go. I wanted to follow up real quickly from last week, we talked a lot about building culture. And just two things that I didn't kind of necessarily mention, just want to highlight, and we'll see it throughout this talk and the others as well, is that culture is contagious, either positively or negatively. And so it's so important to just be aware of that, because as I mentioned last week, you can have a great vision, you can have a great strategy, but if your culture doesn't start to build what it is you're wanting, it can pull you off the rails so quickly. And for us, I believe that culture starts with leadership. And what I mean by that is, first of all, with the minister, with me, with the elders, and then with those who serve. And so one of the things that we constantly do is at our session meetings, like this year, we have talked a lot about the importance of creating an invitational culture. We want people to invite others. And so we talk about it every month at session, and then also with our serving teams. And so I get specific. I say like who have you been inviting, or what are the barriers of inviting, or even along the lines of like how has it been going, kind of anecdotal to see where it is. And then we do it every week with our serving teams. And so we have huddles before the service with our serving teams. And so I meet with our first impressions team about 40 minutes before the service begins. There are greeters, our inside greeters, our outside greeters, our coffee hosts, and I just remind them again of the fact that new people are going to be coming. We want to welcome people. And I even say the line of like, listen, if I preach a crappy message, or if our music doesn't hit all the marks, people are more forgiving about that if they've been welcomed warmly. And so I'm like, listen, please help me out a little bit, right? Like the better you welcome people, the more mediocre I can be. And it's so true. Like the number one comment I get from people who come to the church is not like, wow, that was an amazing message. It was, you, your people welcomed us well. And so I talk about, we want to welcome but not smother, right? Like this idea, we don't want to be all up in people's grills. Um, and then about 20 minutes before the service starts, I meet with all of our music team, our tech team, our kids ministry team, and then just again talking about how we portray ourselves will come across and say more than, or as much as what we're wanting to teach and sing. So just little things you can do. It doesn't cost any money, but repetition is key when it comes to culture. So second thing I want to follow up on, then I'll jump into this week, is when it comes to change. There are some great questions around change, and I realize that change is like sometimes a real challenge for people. Two things that we always consider when we talk about change is, number one is the appetite for change, right? Like where are people at in terms of the spectrum for change? You'll have people in your congregation who are like, we want to change everything all the time, let's just go. And there's other people who are like, if you ever say that word change again, you're done, right? Like, and so understand the spectrum, but change is always tied to vision. Whenever I talk to people, I say, listen, I don't just change for change's sake. Like I talk to people about the process, about how we've gone through it, about why we're doing it. And when you can get people understanding the why behind the change, they tend to come a little bit closer to kind of where you want it to be. Because we talk about change being about purpose and not about preference. Then the second thing is so important is capacity for change, right? You can't just keep changing everything all the time, because you're going to run people into the ground. And I just had a conversation with one of our key leaders yesterday, and we both came to the conclusion of like, listen, okay, we need to steady the ship, right? Like we've changed a number of things. We don't have the capacity to make more changes. And so you constantly got to be kind of rolling through that as well. So I just want to kind of mention that as well. And understand the things that I'm talking about, like this did not happen overnight. Like I'm going to jump into our story around the culture of generosity. And this has been an ongoing conversation, and it's something that we continually need to be talking about. And so for us, one of the keys as a church is we want to be generous. And so I want to have a little bit of a conversation around stewardship, around finances, and then use of our building. So in 2017, we got the great news that in our 130-year-old building, we had major issues with the roof. Structurally, there was a problem, and initial estimates were going to be $2 million to make the fix. And so this is like not one of those sexy fixes, right? Like you can spend $2 million and people would walk into your building the next day and be like, what did you do? And be like, we fixed the shingles, we fixed the eaves troughs, right? Like nobody wakes up in the morning, it's like, I am so jazzed, I can't wait until I get to fix my roof again, right? And so we were in a situation where we had to make a decision of were we going to stay in the building or were we going to go? And you want to tell, like, people were like not happy with this conversation. And so the problem was we identified the problems is that we were in an old building, it needed major repairs, we had limited parking, and we had a poor use of space, right? We had these big, massive rooms that weren't really doing kind of what was needed for us. And so in 2017, we started a process by which we were going to consider what we're going to do. And there were three options on the table. One was to stay in the building, make the changes and do that. Number two was to sell the building and build somewhere new. And number three was to leave the building and lease somewhere else, whether it's whatever it might have looked like. And that was so important because different people in our congregation were at different places in terms of what we wanted to do. And when you're considering change, when you're considering what you're going to do, you have to at least show people that you have considered all the options and that you are making the best decision moving forward. We couldn't just suddenly say based on emotion, well, of course we're going to stay in the building. As a bit of an aside, I'm not a building guy. And so I was like already in my mind, let's leave this building because we're going to spend $2 million just to fix the roof. It's going to be ridiculous. And so we went through the process of about 18 months of interviewing, talking. We brought in an outside consultant to help us walk it through. And as elders, we finally came to a place where we said, listen, we need to make a decision and present this decision to the congregation. And the two things that we always pray for as elders is that there would be a sense of unity and peace, that we would be united in our decision and that we would really feel like the peace of Christ at work in it. And so I remember on a particular Saturday morning, we gathered, and at that time we had 12 elders. And I would say in terms of the decision, we kind of landed at the place of we're either going to leave the building or we're going to stay in the building or leave the building and build somewhere new. And I would say my elders were divided by a third. Four or five of them thought we should leave this building. Let's get out of here. Four of them thought, what are you thinking? We need to stay in this building. This is huge. This is significant. And then a half of them or a third of them were like, whatever, let's just make a decision and start moving forward, right? We're at the place where we had to make the decision. So on the Saturday, we made the decision, and I strongly felt for us to leave the building, And so we made the decision to leave the building. We hadn't told anyone else yet. And we said, listen, let's pray for peace. And so we were going to come back on the Tuesday and finalize the decision and then present to the congregation the following week. Well, the Sunday morning I wake up to get ready to go and preach, and I felt like ill. Like I just felt like I am done. And I knew it was linked to this decision. And I remember praying, God, if you can just get me through the morning, we'll talk about this in the afternoon. It was kind of like my deal with God. And so he did. I'm not really sure how well the morning went, but in the afternoon for the next 2.5 days, I just felt no peace. And I knew that I'd be going before my elders on the Tuesday and saying, I think we've made a wrong decision. After I was the guy leading the charge to leave the building. Like I was like, sell it, let's go, let's move. And I have an eldership team that is they don't keep their opinions to themselves, right? So they're not like quiet individuals. And so we met, and I remember walking into the room and I said something really eloquent as like, so like, where are we at? How have your last couple of days been? And it was dead silence, dead silence. And then one by one, we went around and everybody said they did not feel at peace with the decision we are about to make. We believe, and I get choked up talking about it, but this was the movement of the Holy Spirit. But I believe we're able to discern the movement of the Holy Spirit because we put in the work on the back end and the front end of doing it. So we reversed our decision, even though we knew we had the problems that we did. We decided we were going to move forward. We're going to stay in the building and move forward. And so that started the journey where we are today, where we have spent about $3 million on the building. We jumped in, and what happened out of that was then when we stayed in the building, we decided a key thing for us was our vision and our purpose. And what started to come about is that we asked the question, do we want to be a church in our community or a church for our community? And they're very different. And we came to the place saying we want to be a church that is for our community. And what that means is the use of our building. And so here's just some of the pictures that came up. And what's interesting about this is that as we talked about it, we recognized what were some of the changes that we needed to make. And so if we're going to stay in the building, we wanted to make a generational decision that would really kind of help us set it up for generations to come. And so this was the picture of our, and the most contentious piece was going to be the use of our sanctuary. It was the most underutilized room in the building, like 1 hour a week on a Sunday, and that was it. And we're like, this is ridiculous. This is not helpful. And so we talked about a major renovation within, and you want to get people's blood boiling. Talk about changing the sanctuary, right? Like you can serve coffee in different places, Joel. You can change up the kids' room, Joel. You can do this, Joel. You can paint the walls different. But God forbid you touch the sanctuary, right? Like that was the conversation. And so this is what we did. We completely remodeled it. And just a little bit of a before and after. And what happened was we started our capital campaign at the most brilliant time in the history of the world. We started it in March 2020, where we were going to like, hey, we need $2 million. And then the world shut down and we're like, oh, this is amazing. But we just continue to trust. And what happened was when churches were shut down, the sanctuary was always going to be the last change. We're going to do it at the end. After we change everything else in the building, we're going to come to the sanctuary. Well, when COVID hit and churches were shut down, we decided as a leadership, this was the opportune time to make the change. And so we made the decision, and the sanctuary was the first thing that we did, in addition to like the structural things that needed. And what happened was that as we made the changes, people came on board and began to support it. And so these are some of the other pictures of just some of the rooms out that we renovated. We've pretty much renovated the entire church, and we understood that we weren't just going to simply spend money on the adult spaces, but our vision was if we want to reach families, if we want to reach new people, we didn't want people stepping into our basement and the parents thinking like, does my kid need another tetanus shot? Like, what is going on? Like, it's got to be in a place where you're welcoming. Listen, there's enough barriers for people coming to church. We don't want to create even more. And so part of the vision was we want to reach new families. We want to reach people. And so we need spaces where they are going to be comfortable leaving their kids. We renovated entire, this is just one of the gatherings after service recently. And so we started to renovate it. And one of the things that we did in the part of the renovation is we actually changed the name of our building. And so it's no longer Paris Presbyterian Church anything. It's the For Paris Center, and Paris Community Church meets there. And the reason is this is what we want when it comes to people being open and wanting to come and use our space. And so out of the renovation, our building has become like a hive of activity. And what the benefit of this is is that we have about 4 to 5 community groups that use our building every week. We have major concerts that come in, major theater production groups. We have about 16,000 people come through our building every year through rentals. And so what it does is two things, is it builds a reputation within your community where people are like, hey, this is a church that is for our community. So we have school graduations, we have concert recitals, we have all kinds of things. And the other thing it does is it brings people into a building that they otherwise would have never entered, and it creates opportunities. And so one of the things that we do for larger rentals like concerts and theater productions is we have a team of ushers who are volunteers who are there to help people and then answer any questions that people have. And almost the number one question that gets asked is, well, is this still a church? Like, is this still being used? And it has been significant for us. Now, it's not without its challenges. Like we're in a calendar challenge now in terms of how do we lock up space for outside groups versus ministry. And so people know, like, you need to book rooms. Like, you can't just show up. And this happens to me all the time. Like, I'm the worst. I show up and be like, oh yeah, we'll meet in this room. And I walk in and I'm like, oh, I guess we won't meet in this room, right? So I have like a mobile office now, it seems at times. But it's working. And so that's kind of the element around the building that has helped us. But tied into it, the bigger question is, how do we talk about money? Because at the end of the day, um, for that capital campaign, we had about $250,000 in savings that we used. We received some grants. We've raised about $2 million in addition to our regular operating. It was amazing it's been 5 years, well, 4 years since we've been running it. Our givings to operating have increased every single year as well. And so when we talked about giving, it was like, listen, you can't take from what you give to ministry to support the building. And so it has been amazing just to see how it's worked. But when it comes to money, things that we've really learned is you got to talk about vision, right? I mean, other really smart people talk about this, that people give to mission and vision. So it's always the why we give. It's not like, hey, we need to fix our building. No, that was never the talk. It was, how do we see our building as being a resource for us and for our community? That was the why. How we give, we talk about the importance um, of being generous, and then to be specific, right? The last number of years, we have been very specific around giving to help support our capital campaign. But people aren't just going to blindly give because you have kind of asked them to do that. And so it's been through this whole capital campaign that it's changed our perspective around how it is that we talk about money. And so some specifics for us is we speak on it regularly. And so I probably preach on giving, on generosity, 3 to 4 times a year. I'll work it into different messages, because what we want to do is we want to normalize the conversation around giving, and it's always attached to generosity. And so if you only talk about giving when there's a need, then people are like, okay, here it comes, like we're waiting for it, right? But if you constantly talk about it, then suddenly it begins to become much more normalized. Second thing we do is we give monthly updates. And so we send out a weekly e-blast. We don't use a printed bulletin anymore. Everything's electronic. And every month we always update in terms of how people have given, not just simply to like operating and supporting our ministries, but also to other ministries, to other areas. So we talk about it. And I never make the assumption that people actually know what their money is being used for. And so we highlight it through testimony. Like when we run our summer kids camps, like we talk about, like, and I make it very clear, like I thank people and I say, if you don't give, none of this happens. Like this just doesn't like appear out of thin air. And then about twice a year, we make a larger ask. And so that's when a letter goes out electronically, but also we mail it and we talk specifically about around ministry in terms of just what exactly it is. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, but I'm going to give you some time for Q&A in a moment. Um, but then also my involvement as a pastor, right? One of the key lessons that I learned out of the capital campaign was the importance of me talking about it with people and what it looks like in my own life. And this is where some people might be like, I'm not so sure about this. And that's okay. It's taken me a number of years to get to this place, but I make it personal. And so I share personally what my family gives. And so I don't give the specific dollar amount. We always talk about percentages. Um, and and I was reticent about this. One, because at first I was like, well, I don't want to make it seem like, hey, look at me, look at me. Or people look at me and be like, really, that's it? Like you're the pastor, you should give more than that, right? Um, but I make it personal and I actually talk about it. And I talk about how, because I don't want people thinking that I'm asking things of them that I'm not asking of myself. And so when I talk about generosity, when I talk about sacrifice, when I talk about like just the struggle it is sometimes to give, right? Like I would love to do to spend things differently or to do things differently or to share the struggles. I just try to make it personal. The second thing that has been a bit of a change for me in the last number of years is I am aware of everything that is given in our church. And so what that means is I sit on the finance team. I'm a part of the conversation. We have brilliant finance people. I love finance people. But when you're creating a budget, you need finance people, you need vision people. You can't just have vision people setting the budget, and you can't just have finance people setting the budget. And there are some lively conversations that go on in our finance meetings as to priorities and as to what we do. And so I sit on the finance team, but I'm also aware of what every person gives. I had that conversation with the elders, and this was a bit of a back and forth. And I know some of the struggle was like, well, like, should the minister know? And you may land a different place. We've made the decision that I do know. And the reason that I know is not, I mean, the question often gets asked is like, well, will you play favorites? I'd like to think I wouldn't, but on the flip side, we see it as a discipleship thing as well. For example, like I'm aware of all the people that serve, and I'm aware of the people who serve and give of their time more than others. It doesn't mean that I favor them more than anyone else in the church. But what it does, by me knowing what people give, is we're able to monitor our givings and say, okay, as we take this next step of faith, do we have the finances available? And so what does this start to look like? And so if giving dips, as it has on occasion, we're able to look at it and say why. And oftentimes it's because like a few people have moved away, some families have moved away. And so we're just aware of that. Be like, okay, wait a second. No, we're doing okay here. It also helps me when I make personal asks of people. I sit on a board, a board of a Christian charity, and the executive director is the one who goes in the room to the biggest donors. They want to talk with him, and there was a large donor in our church that I'm aware of, and he had asked me to come and meet with him about something different. There's some personal things going on in his life, and so I said yeah. And before I went, a couple of days before, I felt like God was saying, like, if he asks about finances, be prepared to give an educated response. And so sure enough, we went in and we chatted about things that were going on. As he's about to leave, he's like, hey, another question. He's like, how can I help the church? And I'm like, listen, like, this is great. You being here, da da da. And I almost kind of pushed it away. So I'm like, I don't want to get into this. He's like, no, 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 no. He's like, stop being weird. Like, how can I help the church financially? And so we had taken on a mortgage. We currently have, when we did the capital campaign, a mortgage of about $700,000 It dropped down to about 600,000. So I was able to talk about the mortgage. And what I was able to do was talk about the quicker we're able to alleviate our mortgage, the more it frees up money for ministry in our operating fund because interest comes off our operating. And so I said, listen, for every $100,000, it frees up about $6,000 on our operating fund. And I'm not a finance guy, right? Like I feel like a bit of a fraud when it comes to talking about finances, but I know enough to have a conversation. And so he's like, okay. And I said, so you want to know how you can help? Pay off our mortgage. Now, I would not have had that conversation with him if I didn't think he had the capacity to do it, right? Like that's unfair. If I walked into someone and they don't have that kind of reason, I wouldn't make that ask. And so we always talk about percentages, but there are some major donors in our church, and I go and I talk to them specifically about it. Well, end of the story, he didn't give the 600,000, but he gave $125,000 as a result. And so we've just seen it drop a little bit more. So that's just been helpful. The other thing we do is that when we're going to make a move with regards to finances, um, when we talk to some of our larger donors and givers, they can kind of help us understand, like, are we going to be able to make this mark? And so when my big top 10 donors come in and we talk about some of the changes we're going to want to do, and they're like, yeah, we'll support that. We'll give above and beyond we regularly do. It builds confidence. And so we often go to our large donors first, see what they're going to give. And then when we're able to present to the rest of the congregation, we're already able to say, hey, this amount has already been pledged. And so yeah, I've talked a lot and I apologize for that. But Karen's going to jump in and talk a little bit about some of the resources that we use, and then we will leave some time for Q&A at the end.
Yeah. This is great. When one of where the seed was planted for this webinar series was because I get the Paris Community Church emails that are sent out weekly that Joel just mentioned. And I saw how they talked about money, both for their capital campaign and for their annual gifts. And then Joel and I were in a meeting together around this time, and I was telling him, like, enthusiastically, I said, whenever I'm out talking to churches, they always want examples of where people are actually doing what I'm talking about. And if you want to know what I talk about, there's webinars online, or invite me to your congregation or presbytery. I'm happy to share. And so we started talking about this, and I'd love you to do a webinar on how you ask for money. But as we talked about it, I also realized when we did Stewards by Design, and whenever I go to a stewardship conference, it's always money follows mission. And I've heard that since I started 18 years ago in this stewardship and plan giving role, but it's taken me a long time to really absorb that and understand what it means. And so as I talked more to Joel, and he was sharing me more of the story of Paris and how all the decisions they made about the building and their program and the communities, I'm like, yeah, this is a stewardship topic, but it's about so much more, because money follows mission, and we want to ask for gifts when we're really excited about what the gifts are going to do and how they're going to participate in God's mission. So that's why, if any of you are wondering, why is this a stewardship, or stewardship taking the lead in this? But yeah, and one of the things, this was an update. Yes. Let me just make sure. Which one is this one? Okay, go to the next slide, Joel. I think I might have. Yes, okay, this was the slide that I wanted to show. It was from one of the emails that they sent out. And this is the sort of regular annual campaign that they do, and he talked about. And so here are some of the things that I thought they did very well. And I told Joel when we were going to share this, I'd say what they did very well, and he can add any comments if there's anything else that you need to know. But I really liked here how they integrated it with their theme for the church year. So there's a theme there, and they tied in the finances and how it ties in essentially to everything else they're doing. It's a very positive message. So they're talking about the exciting initiatives that are happening. They're sharing real costs. So in the operating fund, it's talking about the deficit and the higher bills for the boiler and the capital campaign. They're identifying their needs. But they're really doing it in a very positive way. And I loved this, that the elders are thrilled about the positive momentum within our church, and we are eagerly anticipating the next chapter of God's work. It's a privilege to serve you and be an integral part of this vibrant church and community. So I think this really backs up and is an example of how they are tying the money into the vision for the church and how they're doing this. So, and this was a message about as they were coming up to their year end. This was sent out in November 2023. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. Oh, we lost it.
I think I just froze my my
Okay.
screen here. I'll get it back up here.
Okay, great. Oh yeah. When you went down, you can see the little 3 marks. So when you went down a little farther, they also had the ways to give. And this is something for congregations. I always say, make sure you've got multiple ways and make it easy for people to give to your congregation. So right after their message, they remind them the different ways to give. They have the e-transfer, they've got online, they've got checks. Some people still do use checks, and it's still a very economical way to give, and then a way to set up recurring or monthly donations. And I had a congregation once ask me, they said, oh, we did e-transfers. We've signed up for e-transfers. It's great. It's nice and economical. People send it. We love it. We don't think we need online donation forms because credit cards are involved. There's a larger percentage that comes off with credit cards and all of that. And I was like, I had to think about that for a while, but I was like, there's a role for both. Your regular members, the people part of your community, are going to feel comfortable doing a e-transfer. They're going to find out what the email address is, and they can do that, and they can send the information about their donor and all of that. But if you're somebody who went to the church 20, 30 years ago, and this is a real example, and was from one in the Maritimes, they went 20, 30, it meant a lot to them, and they wanted to become a monthly donor to that congregation, and they looked and they couldn't find a way to become a monthly donor. And so when I was talking to the treasurer, I said, you should put a monthly donation, button on your website, because they had a website. And they said, well, we really like the e-transfer. It's cheaper for us. And I said, well, even if you don't want to set up a system, Canada Helps has a way to give online, and you can do that. Well, but they take a percentage. And I'm like, yeah, but it's money you wouldn't see otherwise, because this person had contacted me to say, how do I give to the church? And so they were going the extra step, but a lot of people might have just given up. So I was like, there can be a role for both, and you can educate people. This is the better way to give, or this is the way if you're giving regularly. But online is a great way to give for your visitors, for people there first time. They can do it on their phone. Often these days, I'm in a church if I'm guest speaking. This is to invite me to guest speak. I'll see, can I make a gift to the offering on my phone during the offering time? And it's just a little interesting thing I always find, because I never have cash. Okay, I'm going to go to the next because you want your questions. The building update again, and I'm going to put these slides, and I'm going to put copies of these asks on the website just so that you can see them, because it's hard for you to read right now. But when they did their building they started again talking about what they wanted to do, that they wanted to have a building that wasn't in the community simply, but it was for the community. So exactly what Joel had said. They started with that they were grateful the work had been done, for the gifts that had been given. There's a lot of gratitude. There's a lot of generosity coming out right at the very beginning of this ask. They had a place talked about where people can find out information at the church. And then when you scrolled down, they talked about the work that was continued. So they gave a nice little update. People knew what was going on, what had already progressed. But then they said, yep, now we need your help. So we're getting into the specificity that Joel talked about. So they talked about that they had spent the 2.5 million, including the mortgage. And they talked about the values that they had, being able to spend the money as it came along, so that they couldn't go further until more money came in. Okay, and the next one. And so I really liked this. Honest, upfront, here's some unexpected costs, as anyone can relate to. So costs, anyone who was building during the pandemic knows this about how costs were escalating during that time. So they talked about some of the new costs that came up. Yep. And so very specific, as he said. And then here's what the ask is. And so they had a very outline, shows the 175,000. And I like that both the bigger numbers and the smaller numbers are offered, because as Joel said, you might have somebody who says, oh, I can write a check and I can cover all those expenses. Or you might have someone who says, oh, well, I could contribute the $10,000, if you above, or I could, do one of those numbers. So yeah, and there's options for help. Again, this person, I love this. They emphasize every gift is significant and will help us complete this portion of the project. So whatever people give is important. We need to continue that. And then they had, again, the ways to give and then opportunity for an unveiling. So this was all part of an update email that went out there. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joel just to talk about how they thank. You've seen a little bit how they report back and how they've celebrated wins.
Yeah, no, thanks, Karen. And I'd say, like, if you want the actual letters that we wrote, like we send out 2 to 3 of them every year. Just email me, I will send them to you. Like, change the church letterhead, like just use it. Like, we just use it. Like, if it can be helpful to you. But just so you know, kind of the specific ask, like, so leading up into December, we always just understand your target, right? December is the biggest giving month of the year across the board. And so you want to utilize that and to talk about it. And again, it builds over time as people start to become more and more aware. And so we focused giving this year on people helping us to pay down the mortgage. And we talked about it very openly. Like, so we're like, listen, paying down the mortgage isn't sexy, but it is a necessity. And as I mentioned earlier, we framed in the sense of, as we pay down the mortgage, it frees up ministry within our church and within our community. And so I'm going to follow that up in about a week when we get all the final numbers in, again, to say thank you and to just applaud the generosity that has happened. And then talk about, as we set up for annual meeting, 2 specific asks, one around youth and one around connecting further with new people in our community. And so again, it's always being pushed by vision. And then just the last thing around finances is always saying thank you, like thanking people, reporting back, and just celebrating what has been happening. And so I think we just want to continue to make that happen. So we're going to open it up to some Q&A, but just some final thoughts for you guys to consider is one is when it comes to stewardship, number one is like, how are you using your building? Like, how are you using it? And you may not be there yet, but just opening it up, looking for opportunities. It is a huge resource that is so often underutilized, particularly within communities. And studies show, like, across the board, like not in just churches, but churches can be such a great resources for our community. And so we got to get a little bit more, be more willing to kind of open the doors up. And the second one is, how are finances and giving talked about and celebrated in your church? Because if you want to build a culture of generosity, you have to talk about it. You have to get people on board. And I get it. Like, people are always like, well, like, and I realize financial giving is not the only way that people can give. I get it, that people serve, that people give of their time, but finances is a part, and it is the most prickly point of conversation. And I remember a prophet of mine one time said, listen, like you should, as a minister, you should never talk about politics and finances. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to be like, politics. Yeah, we'll kind of leave that one alone. But finances, like from a biblical understanding, Jesus talks about finances almost, other than the kingdom of God. Jesus talks about finances, like more than prayer, more than reading the scriptures, more than going to temple to worship. He talks about finance. Like, it is so important. And so I'm like, it was almost a conviction for me. I'm like, why am I not talking about it? And so I find people are appreciative of the conversation and at least presents kind of where we are and what's going on. So we got 15 minutes. So any questions? I'm going to ask Grace to help moderate, or if there's other questions that are coming in live, we can kind of go from there.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, but people can feel free to add more. If somebody would like to ask their question live, just use the raise hand button that might be on the control bar on the bottom, either under reactions or more, or should maybe just say raise hand. But the first question I have is, how do you staff the building for community use?
Yeah, so it depends on who's using it. So we have some regular rentals or community groups that use the building. And so if they're like regular usage, so we have a theater production that runs their rehearsals there. We have the Ambers who use it. We have art groups that use it. So we normally um kind of walk them through the first time, and then they're kind of like they get a key, they get access, they come and go as they need. For one-offs, we have a team of people that is led by one team lead who will welcome people into the building and then help them with any needs and then lock up when they go. When we have larger venues, like for example, we had um, a concert this past Friday, Bedouin Sound Clash, if you've ever heard of them. Like we'll have a team of probably 7 or 8 volunteers that act as ushers. And so again, it's not one size fits all, but it is a matter of just kind of working them through that way.
I have two questions that I think I can maybe put together for your for help for your own clarity. Um, did you ask your congregation to pledge? And do you still pass an offering plate and have a specific prayer during worship?
So in terms of the pledge, with the capital campaign, we did meet with families. We had campaign ambassadors who went into people's homes and sat down and talked about it. And at that point, we did ask people to make a pledge because that was going to help us determine what we could step into. And the pledge was always based on amount and then number of years for them to fulfill their pledge. And in some of the communication, you even see that some people gave like a one-time gift and that was it. And then other people would give a pledge over the course of a couple of years. I mean, and again, to Karen's point about flexibility, it's so important. Like we had someone who said, I'd like to give a gift of $10,000 for the next 10 years, but you're asking for pledges over 3 years. Is that okay? And we're like, yeah, that's okay. We're good with that. Like, we're totally good with that. So in terms of regular offering, no, we don't ask people to make specific pledges with regards to our operating fund. With regards to the offering, we do not pass the plate. The majority of our giving is online. So very little comes in on a Sunday morning. We don't talk about it. We don't pass the plate during the service. We have offering plates available at the doors. We have multiple doors to come and go, which is great because then people don't feel the awkwardness of kind of shaking my hand at the end of the service if they don't want to. But we have at every door, in every pew, we have ways to give, whether it's electronically, whether it's through e-transfer, through an envelope. And so we don't pass the plates. We don't necessarily even talk about money every week. We highlight it at different times. And this is something we're constantly trying to kind of work through. So I'm always interested to have other people's suggestions. Like I listen and see what other people are doing and then try to make it fit as well. So
Another question. For monthly financial updates, is it in the service or in the weekly newsletter or both? What does this actually look like? actual dollars against budget, general, on, over, under budget, or something else?
Yeah, so we our financial updates are primarily done through the newsletter, and so that way we can say a little bit more. Oftentimes we'll talk about it in the service, but then we'll reference it, and so we'll have printed copies available. One of the things we really want is we want people to connect with us electronically through email. And that's the number one focus for us, is so we always kind of refer to the sense of like, hey, if you'd like to hear more, or you'd like to see more, make sure you sign up for our e-blast, because then like social media is great, but you can't always control it, right? Whereas you have personal email, you can be sending these things, you can give more information. I'll often, not I shouldn't say often, I'll on occasion do videos of myself when I'll talk about it, and then we'll upload that as well. So primarily we do it through the e-blast, but on bigger, sometimes bigger events, we'll talk about it on the Sunday morning as well. In terms of how we present it, we always present in terms of what was given and then where we are with regards to budget. And so we talk very openly if we're running a deficit. We talk very openly if we're running a surplus, in terms of then what the needs are. And so, and then if there is a deficit, at times we're able to talk about why. And so, for example, we had a deficit in our operating budget last year of about $35,000 heading into December. And we talked about it. And in part was we had some unexpected repairs. We had utilities went up, and there was a couple of factors that kind of weighed into all of that. And so we just talked about it. There's been times where we've talked about, hey, giving is down. And that can be for, I mean, economy, like our economy is taking hits, right? So we just talk about it and are open about it, and don't guilt people into it at all. So just, I find the more specific you are about what your needs are, and the more authentic, like just open about it, people just appreciate that. So they're not like, we're very clear on what the needs are and where we're at. So people aren't trying to like interpret the message, right? It's like, hey, we have a shortfall of $30,000. If this $30,000 is not made up, we're going to have to really think through what this and we talk about it in that way. So.
Thank you. What does your annual meeting look like? Do you hold it during or outside worship? Can you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, our annual meeting, we run it after worship on a Sunday. So we try to, in terms of our annual report, we obviously have the financial numbers in there, but we also have a fairly like we have a ton of pictures, we have a lot of narrative. We always talk about not just, hey, this is what you gave, but this is what your giving enabled us to do. We talk about new people, we talk about ministries, and then through our annual meeting, what we do is we talk in more kind of larger chunks. Like we don't get into the nitty-gritty unless people want to ask those questions. And we actually use our annual meeting as a means to pray for the ministries of our church. And so as we're presenting the previous year, so in this case 2024, we'll talk about it. Our finance people will present it, and then we will have someone get up and pray for some of those ministries, and pray for it. And then as we present our 2025 budget, we again do so. We pray about it. We pray for it, and I always talk about why the budget is what it is. And so if there has been reduced or increased, like for example, we're putting on an additional $40,000 on our budget this year, because we want to engage more with youth in our community and new people in our community, and we're just unapologetic about it. At the start of our annual meeting, we always start off with a time of sharing. And so we let people share what they are grateful for. What are they giving thanks for God? And that just sets the tone. And so it's really celebratory. And then we just kind of move forward.
Thank you. One more, maybe. What does fundraising in your community look like? What kind of community fundraising do you do?
Good question. So we if we can come on board and support um other things within our community, we do. So I'll give you two examples. One is we'll at times we will so we have a ministry called the Raw Carrot, which produces amazing gourmet soup. A bit of a plug for them. I'll talk a little bit more about them with regards to outreach. But it's a ministry started 10 years ago to provide meaningful employment for people who are on disability. And so instead of doing, anyways, we did that. And so they make amazing soup. And so, for example, our church at times will make a donation to the food bank. And the way we do that is we will purchase raw carrot soup and give it to the food bank that they can then hand out as nutritious soup. Something we're going to do this Sunday is actually, I'm sure those of you in Ontario anyways, are getting a $200 check from Mr. Ford. Again, I'm not getting political on this. I don't know what you think about this, but someone in our church was like, hey, listen, I don't need this $200. And so I want to give it to a charity. I'm like, okay, that's a great idea. He's like, hey, there might be other people who are in the same boat as well. And so what we're going to do is he's going to get up and share his story around how he was listening to the radio and realized that, he doesn't need that $200. And so he wants to give it to something else. And he's going to say, hey, if there's others who are feeling the same way, if you give it through the church, we'll make one large donation to our local food bank moving forward. And so it's just going to kind of run through us into something else. So those are some of the things that we've done. We've raised funds for we support Presbyterian Sharing, obviously PWS&D, I shouldn't say obvious, Ukraine. I'm involved in a prison ministry as well, and so and people give very generously to that as well.
I think for the last question, and I just was breezing over some of the questions and I'll combine them a little bit. So what do you think if you would look at your income and just roughly percentages, like, are you getting very much from rentals? Like, is there a diversity? So is there some from rentals, we know donations from within the church? Do you get donations from outside the church? And you mentioned grants. So what do you think for your annual income, it might be a breakdown for donations, either in like people part of the church community? Are there any giving from outside the church community?
Yeah, there's people who give. I mean, people gave outside of our church community towards a capital campaign. And what was really cool around that was we've garnered a reputation of being for our community. And so people in our community were like, hey, listen, I love what you're doing with your building. Here's a check for $1,000 or $10,000. So it hasn't been a lot, but it has come in that way. We've received grants from our county to help. So specifically last year, we received a grant of $2,500 from our county to run community outreach. And so what we did was we ran block parties. I'll talk about that next week. Yeah. Stuff like that. And so like our givings every year. So rentals is something relatively new. And we have a tiered rental. So if you are a for-profit, you pay one price. If you are a not-for-profit or a community group, you pay another price. And that other price is really to cover the cost of just wear and tear on the building. Last year, we received about $20,000 in rental revenue. Our hope and our vision down the road is that we will receive enough in rental income to cover the operations of our building, which would be about $60,000. And so that's the goal. But we never pitch in the sense of, hey, we want rent. Like the number one reason to bring groups in is not for the income, right? Like it's not worth the hassle sometimes, right? Like if that's the only reason, it is to how we project ourselves in the community and how we get other people in the building. So for example, and this is, again, people might be like, what are you doing? Like for concerts, we have a major concert promoter who comes through, and one of the ways that they raise revenue is through the sale of alcohol. And so we license our church for when they come in. Now we don't do it, we don't do that. But when they come in and do a concert, people will be drinking beer and wine in our sanctuary as they watch. And you want to talk about ruffled feathers at first, right? Like that was a bit of a challenge. But what it did was it opened up people's conversation. And what we see happening is people what kind of a church is this anyways? And we've had people show up on a Sunday morning, and the common line is, well, you should meet our, like, you should show up and meet who we are. And so people show up on a Sunday morning because they're like, I want to see what they talk about on a Sunday if they're willing to open up their doors like this. I went off point there. Sorry, Karen, but
No, I think that's a great way to wrap us up. And people, I'm sure, because every answer you give just sparks off new questions. And I'm like, oh, we could go down this and we could go down this, but we've got 2 more weeks. So as Joel said, if you've got questions, send them to him. He may cover them then in the next 2 weeks or answer you personally if it's a very specific question. As he said, he's very willing to share resources. And this is with the churches I meet across Canada. They're like, can I steal this, or can I get copyright for this? And they're like, you just take it, like these aren't our words, they're God's words, and if you can adapt them to your situation. So yeah, thank you once again, Joel, for giving us lots to think about, and we look forward to seeing you at the same time, same place next week and the week after. 2 more weeks to hear about this exciting ministry. And we'll have this, Grace will send you an email once the recording is posted up.
thanks everyone. We'll see you. Hopefully we'll see you next week. And we'll, yeah, have a great week.